مهارات، كيف ممكن نطور مهارات بحثية متعلقة بكيفية إنتاج أبحاث تترجم إلى خطط وسياسات تغييرية، وكيف فينا نتفاعل ويكون في تواصل مع وسائل الإعلام وشبكة التواصل الاجتماعي لنشر الإنتاج العلمي والبحثي. مبدئيا نحن كجلسة حيكون عنا لغة الإشارة، مترجمين لغة الإشارة، عنا مترجمتين، وحيكون عنا ترجمة باللغة العربية والإنجليزية، ففيكم تفاعلوا الخاصية هاي إذا كنتوا بحاجة إلى تختاروا لغة الإشارة وكمان المترجمين. حنبدأ اليوم جلستنا حيكون عنا 3 سيشنز، 3 مقسومة ل3 أقسام. أول قسم اللي هو حنبلش بعد 4 دقايق، اللي هو حتكون دكتور دينا كيوان عم تحكينا أكثر عن نعرف معلومات أكثر عن كيفية شو هي الإمباكت، شو هي إحداث التغيير وكيف بنقدر نعمل تغيير بالأعمال اللي بنقوم فيها والأنشطة الأكاديمية إلى ما هنالك. من بعدها حناخد بريك 10 دقايق، بعدين حيكون في عنا جلسة تانية. جلسة تانية حتكون دكتور مها شعيب وأنا عم نحكي عن مركز الدراسات اللبنانية وكيف قدر يعمل حول المعرفة لتغيير بالمجتمع. وبعدين كمان حنحكي عن محور الإعاقة بالدمج. من بعدها حناخد بريك، لانش بريك نص ساعة، وآخر جلسة حتكون مع دكتور كاترين بران، واللي هي عم تخبرنا كمان عن الإمباكت اللي عملته مع الشباب. ومن بعدها طبعا بين كل جلسة وجلسة في عنا 10 دقايق نفتحها كنقاش أو أسئلة أو مشاركة أفكار فيما يتعلق بأعمالكم، اللي هي كيف تقدر نحول المعرفة لإنتاج تغيير بالمجتمع. هلا قبل ما انتهي هون بحب أتعرف على المشاركين، يعني إذا كل شخص بيعطينا نبذة عن شو بيعمل، فبنحب نسمع منكم.
نوال أبو رعد، أستاذة بالجامعة اللبنانية كلية التربية، عاملة ديداكتيك دي مات دكتوراه بفرنسا، وهلأ أنا على التقاعد من 2 سنين.
تشرفنا. هلا أنا بدي أسمي حسب اللي مبين عندي على الشاشة. عندي مبين سولارا. سولارا. أوكي. جوزيف.
هاي. في أول شيء بدي أعرفه عن زميلتي آلاء عون.
مرحبا، اسمي آلاء عون، بشتغل بمنسقة متابعة وتقييم بمشروع تسريع العمل المدني بلبنان.
أهلا وسهلا.
جوزيف سخن، مسؤول تقني Innovations for Change، ابتكار من أجل التغيير. سعيد جدا نكون هنا.
نوال.
أنا عرفت عن حالي.
نوال، أهلين. في عندي أحمد. برجع بعيد للي هلا دخلوا معنا. نحن هلا بعدنا ببداية انطلاقتنا لورشة العمل، فعم نتعرف على حضراتكم، نعرف بأي مجال بتشتغلوا، لأنه بس نكون عم نحكي اليوم بالورشة العمل بدنا نشوف إنه كيف أكيد لازم يكون في تفاعل لنعرف كيف فينا حسب كل واحد وخبرته كيف يكون في إحداث تغيير من خلال الأعمال اللي بقوم فيها بالمجتمع. في عندي جنى، حب نتعرف على جنى. شو خجولين اليوم؟ اوكي. اذا انا يعني ما حنجبر تعرفونا عن نفسكم، نحن حنعطي المجال للي بيحب، واذا يعني بعطي مجال دقيقة للي بيحب يعرف عن نفسه، من بعدها حنبلش مع دكتور دينا. دكتور دينا.
Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Dina Kiwan. I'm a professor of education at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and I'm leading this Network Plus program, Disability Under Siege, which is a program made up of a network of academics and other organizations who are interested in the fundamental challenge that most children with disabilities in the global south and in the region, you know, the countries we're working on, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, most children with disabilities don't go to school. So we're taking a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach. People who specialize in education, refugees, the arts, and public health and psychology to come together to address these challenges, because as a person living within society and in a community, having a disability affects all aspects of your life. So it's important to take a holistic approach. And so our work has been talking with stakeholders and identifying what the priorities are for research, where the gaps are. And we've funded a number of different projects, smaller arts projects, network projects, and then larger research projects. And what's really important to us is supporting researchers in the region so that their work has an impact. And so this workshop is part of that, to create a space for discussion and for others who are interested in working for social change. Social change is a long process, and especially when we're working in this domain and we want to get funding, we have to show funders that the work we're doing has an impact. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is just to understand what we mean by impact, how we can measure impact, how we can extend our impact, and then just open it up for any questions or discussion. So what do we mean by impact? So impact, we use the word in everyday language, but it also has a scientific meaning. And as researchers, when we talk about impact, it's looking at something where there has been an observable and measurable change in society. And impact can come in different forms. So it can be changing how we do something, and that we would call instrumental impact, or it can be changing how we think about something, a conceptual impact. And in our Disability Under Siege project, both are really important. And I would say the shifting conceptual understandings of disability are perhaps the heart of the issue. It's not just an issue of resources or not having the knowledge how to do things. It's how the public understands disability. It's how professionals and policymakers understand disability. And traditionally, disability globally has been stigmatized. But, you know, that's changing. It's been taken up with kind of a human rights movement, moving away from notions of just solely a medical issue, or that, you know, we need to be charitable to those with disabilities, to understanding that we're all human beings with a range of abilities, and we must remove barriers in society. So that's the sort of work we've been doing around shifting conceptual understandings of disability. But showing impact can be quite challenging because we're not in a lab setting where we can control all the variables. You know, in the real world, many things influence and come together, and sometimes it's hard to show how what we're doing specifically has that impact. So we need to think very carefully when we're designing our research studies to build in our thinking right from the beginning. So we anticipate, well, if we have this kind of outcome and we want to apply it, how will we measure it? How will we show our pathway from our research to the impact? So why is it important to think about impact? I mean, I think all of us, we care about our research. We want to do research that matters, and we can learn from what works and what can be done better. And as I've already mentioned, when we can prove that the work we have done has changed something in the real world, then there's possibility of us getting more funding to continue our work. So how can we show impact? What does it mean to say we need to measure impact? Well, it's a combination of both quantitative or, you know, numerical measures, and also qualitative, so, you know, narrative data. So what do we mean by numerical data? So it can be, you know, sending out surveys and then collating the data, and then there would be some descriptive statistics to show, you know, how many people thought there was an improvement, and then, you know, a number of other measures could be correlated. It could be between gender, age, and so on, and that can be measured with a larger number of people through a survey. It could be attendance figures at an event or training session. It could be official data. I mean, often when we want to show impact, we want to show that the intervention that we've introduced has caused a change. So when that's the situation, we often need to take a measure before we've done the intervention and then after to see what the change would be. And then the second category of data, narrative data, this can be interviews, it can be testimonials that people will give after they've experienced the intervention or have been the receivers of an improved service. It can be stories and so on. So just to go back to our Network Plus program overall, what are our impact goals at the whole program level? So as I've already mentioned, that one of the central aspects is reshaping public understanding of disability in contexts of conflict and crisis in particular, and in the Middle East. The second aspect is to actually support building a body of research to change public policy and practice. So what we found when we did initial scoping is that there is not really a lot of research and evidence on children with disabilities in the region. And certainly where there is that research evidence, there isn't a strong link between the research and how that informs policy and practice. So one of the goals is to strengthen the research infrastructure in the region and build up research capacity. And we've also done that by supporting some early career research fellowships, for example, in addition to the research projects I've mentioned. And this links to number 3, which is enhancing local, regional, and international capacity to address issues of access, participation, and in both formal and non-formal education settings. It's not only schools or universities, but also learning in the community as well. And then fourthly, this is a project that's only funded for 4 years. As I've mentioned before, social change is a very long process. We will measure as much as we can the change that we've done in 4 years, and certainly with the smaller projects, they're even shorter timescales. So what's important is that we build a legacy where there are a network of researchers and organizations who continue to work together and support each other in transferring findings, scaling up to other contexts, and continuing beyond the formal length of the project funding. And what we are using in our program is something called the Value Creation Framework. This is basically a framework for thinking about impact. And we like it because it talks about the work that is undertaken in terms of a value. And it provides a very flexible approach to think about what is valuable and the different ways that benefit can be created. So the framework outlines 5 types of value. There's immediate value. So that's the actual doing of the activity. It's something new, making connections. There's potential value. So that's the value provided by new learning and knowledge and the potential that this can create. And then this is where the area that funders are particularly interested in, applied value. So looking at changes in practice or policy as a result of the activity. Realized value, that's where you can actually measure the improvement or change in performance. And then the last one, reframing value, which has been really central to our work. So this is a new way of understanding how we can think about the topic as a result of the activity. And some of these, they can overlap. They're not supposed to be thought about too rigidly, but just really to provide flexibility to understand the range of values there can be. And sometimes you might have an initial value and then it leads on to additional values. So you may have an initial immediate or potential value, and then that can lead to an applied or realized value, for example. And so the next few slides, I'm not going to read all of them, and these slides can be distributed, but it's just to give you an idea of what impact might look like in different areas and what sort of evidence could be used to show that impact. So for example, in the cultural domain, it could be increased cultural participation or engagement by marginalized audiences. It could be a change in how things are understood, either through an artistic performance or how it's presented in the media, and so on. And so the sort of evidence could be looking at audience and participation feedback from interviews or focus groups. It could be, if it was, for example, looking at broadcast in media or social media, how many downloads have there been from the website? How many times is it mentioned, the work mentioned or cited, and so on. And then similarly, social impact, obviously, we're very concerned with improving equality and social inclusion for people with disabilities. campaigns for this are important, and changing social policy as well. But it's important to document this so that you can show the link, that pathway to impact. So it's looking at increased participation in these different areas for marginalized groups. It can be testimonials. It could be the work that's cited in campaign literature. It could be increased numerical data showing greater social equality in education or employment or so on. And similarly, I think we're very concerned with public policy and law. There's been in the history of disability activism efforts to change legislation, improve public services, legislative change, and so on, international policy agendas to be influenced. And again, in terms of evidencing this, evidence of the use in the policy debate, is the work mentioned in written materials? Has it been cited in public discussions or consultations? Are members, are researchers members of expert panels? And so on. There's a whole list I won't read through, but it is just a resource for when you're thinking about, when you're doing your research, or when you're applying research to have an impact, that you can think through carefully. Now, what is the impact I want? And what is that pathway to evidence that impact? And similarly with practice and service delivery, I won't go through all of that, but obviously we're particularly concerned with education. And so there we would be looking for, having influence in public policy discussions, whether the work is cited, whether there are changes to curriculum. And this can be at school level, or it can be at national or regional level. The key thing is to document where that influence has taken place. And it could be also, the views of students, teachers, and parents, for example. So just to finish up, how can you apply this? Well, again, as I've mentioned, it's really important for this to be not just something that you think about after the research has happened, but you think about it from the very start, that thinking about impact is part of the methodology of your study. So you think about the aims and objectives of your project and think, what am I looking to change or to achieve? How can I measure that? And to build in measures from the start of the study. Think about the stakeholders. Who will benefit from your activities? How will you gather the information that the stakeholders have benefited? And so using the value creation framework can be a good way to think about what is the type of value of your research. Is it about networking and that immediate value of raising an issue that doesn't get mentioned? So it's an initial raising of awareness to measurable change for a particular practice or policy, for example. And to think carefully, how will you collect the data to show that impact and to build that in. And what we have done with our projects is we have worked with the projects to share this approach. It's not a fixed template. People don't have to use it, but take the spirit of it to think about forward planning, to think about the types of impact and what needs to be collected. And often, these are, projects for a limited amount of time, and impact can take much longer to emerge, and that's recognized. And we're also making available some follow-on impact funding that projects can apply for. to extend their impact. But it's important not to just think, okay, well, I'll deal with impact when I come to the end. There's funds for that. But this is something about extending and recognizing that, especially in the area of social change, impact can take a long time. And it's important to measure it over time from the short to medium to long term as much as possible. And so it needs to be tracked. And sometimes when you look back, you might, in the time that you're doing the work, you think, oh, it hasn't had an impact. But then when you look forward and when you get to a certain point in the future and you look back, you can see actually that was a pivotal point. And it's only with hindsight that you can recognize that social change is very incremental. It's lots of small steps, and they build up and accumulate to maybe even enable others to make that final breakthrough. So, often there's competition for funding in domains, and that's a fact of life for NGOs and research centres. But I think as much as possible also, bearing in mind that competition, that social change is a long process and it has to necessarily be collaborative, with all of us contributing different steps to kind of snowball into that change that we want to see on a broader level. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to kind of hear what work you're doing, what challenges you may have had, whether you find this kind of approach to thinking about impact may be helpful for your work. So yeah, I'll hand over to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dina. So as we said, so now it's a discussion, so we can open the discussion. Whoever wants to share their thoughts about their work and how it can be impactful, please, you may raise your hand and then you can talk.
Maybe if I could just get a sense of, I think a few people introduced themselves, but are people researchers, or are they, working for NGOs or activists? Just to get a sense of, whether you are are you producing research or are you using research?
Okay, so shall we ask them to introduce themselves again?
Or just, it doesn't need to go round tightly, but
Yeah.
if anybody wants to give their experience, I think it's a different perspective when you're the researcher as to when you're the organization using the research or making policy, or whether you're an activist working more independently or for an NGO. Okay, Haya? I think Haya has her hand up. Please.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. So this is Haya from International Committee of the Red Cross. Sorry, I joined late, but it's so important topic about translating knowledge into impact. And here I would like to mention that in ICRC, we are trying our research to our operations and benefit as much as we can from the findings in order to provide to meet the needs of the people and provide the support.
Haya,
so
sorry to interrupt you. You're blind.
We started a study about access.
Your line is cutting a little
It's
bit.
cutting.
Mm.
The connection is not good today,
Okay.
the whole delegation. So
Yeah, you may
It's a
start.
bit
can you hear me
better.
now?
It's a bit better now.
Yes.
I will try to speak slowly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we started, we did a study about access of women with disability for health services with our beneficiaries, persons with physical disabilities. So still the study is under, but it's not finalized yet. It's really important because we noticed that the number of women accessing our physical rehabilitation center is less than men in all regions, and that's why we want if women with disability are facing barriers, what's the problem? Is it related to stigma, attitudinal barriers, or what's happening? So we did an interview with women with disability and caregivers of girls with disability. It's a small sample, but we wanted to see the results, and also it's done with students from AUB. And we have an ICRC epidemiologist who's working on the project. So once done, we can share it with you. But again, would like it's so important to do research that will really impact our work in the humanitarian field. So yes, that's it. I hope you were able to hear me.
Yes, no,
Yes.
thank you, Haya. That sounds fantastic and amazing that you built into the project, sort of action research with with an epidemiologist working alongside with you. So be really excited to hear the outcomes of that work if you can share it with us when it's complete. Thank you for sharing that. Is anybody here working with an NGO or activism?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So my name is LEBANON. We're joining here with my colleagues Joseph and Ella from the same laptop. We work at LabCap under FHI 360, Lebanon Civic Actions Accelerator Program. We're attending the session and thank you so much for having us. I'm the inclusion officer at LabCap, and under my portfolio, we focus on gender equality and social inclusion. It's important for us to attend this session today because under LabCap, one of the main components is mainstreaming gender equality and social inclusion with a focus on disability rights. And in the upcoming few weeks, we will be kicking off the consultative research to inform our strategy on what are the priorities, the current priorities for the disability movement in Lebanon, because under this program, we focus both on the capacity strengthening of the civil society and particularly the disability movement in Lebanon, or the people with disability movement in Lebanon, as well as for advocacy purposes. So we hope that this consultative research we will be kicking off, and I'll be reaching out to so many of you that are attending here today to inform us about the priorities so that we can know what to prioritize in the next round of proposals that we are going to be launching soon, whether to capacitate the civil society working on disabilities in Lebanon or for advocacy purposes. So thank you so much. We will leave our email addresses in the chat box in case you wish to reach out to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is part of our program. We want to link and build our network. So absolutely. And, your work sounds great. And yeah, certainly let's link. And I don't know, Etab, says you're going, if you're able, maybe everyone will like to receive everyone else's email, depending on, if people agree, and that could be also shared between everyone in the group and with us as Disability Under Siege.
Yes, definitely. We will have a list of the emails, and we can send, because also this session is recorded, so we can send a link for this session, and also, like sharing knowledge and all of that. Definitely.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Is there anyone coming more from a position as a researcher who wants to talk about their work and how they can have an impact? Ita Sukaria? Yes, please, go ahead. You have mute on. I don't know.
You're muted.
Hello?
Good evening, everyone.
Hello?
This is Ita. Am I still muted?
No, that's good. We can hear you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a teacher at Jinan University of the Faculty of Public Health at Jinan University in Tripoli. Actually, we were newly assigned as a WHO collaborating center by the WHO, and we mainly focus on type of bibliometric analysis studies, which means a purely quantitative analysis of research outputs of countries or institutions about specific topics. And I was sharing this information with you. I'm sharing this information with you to maybe get your ideas or insights about the possibility of doing some quantitative research about research outputs concerning disability in specific countries or in the region as a whole. We are professional in this, actually, and this type of big data analysis. So I'm waiting for your insights, for your advice, actually.
Absolutely. This is also one of our priorities, and I learned just recently.
What do you think?
So there is now a year ago, you may know of this, but UNICEF launched a Center of Excellence for Data on Children with Disabilities. And they hold data sets, they're building it up country by country. And some of our researchers in the network from Palestine, from West Bank, who work in public health and have quantitative skills, have applied for some funding for UNESCO to analyze the data for Palestine. I don't know whether there's data for Lebanon as yet.
You mean research data? You mean research data?
It's data held at national level. I think it uses like Washington Group measures and some other measures. I understand from my Palestinian colleagues that the data is really good. And it's publicly available, but they also provide funds, and they are going to have a workshop coming up. They're doing one at the moment for Europe and Central Asia, but I understand they're going to do one in the Middle East region, and I'll certainly keep you linked into this. I think it's a really important issue, not just to analyze the data, but to question sort of how things are measured and kind of the methodology as well.
What has been done yet, and what is lacking to do on the remaining future in specific countries, and what are the topics of interest in research concerning disabilities, disability topics in general? There are many questions someone may ask themselves before doing such quantitative analysis as we do usually. So that's why I will be glad to have your insights or your help concerning this. We may find a specific topic to dig inside specific countries if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I need your advice.
No, absolutely. Let's be in touch on that.
Yeah, thank
excellent.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Atab.
Thank you, dear.
Any other?
Does anybody want to share frustrations or difficulties they've had? So, you know, it's difficult sometimes getting policymakers or practitioners to listen and change. You know, they work on a different time scale to researchers or activists. Does anybody have anything they want to share with the group or successes?
I'm interested to learn from Ali Ghaddar. I remember we worked together on projects, you know, after Beirut blast. So there was a project about, you know, like Karantina, redesigning Karantina for its neighborhood. So I'm interested to know more about this, Ali. So maybe you can give us some thoughts about it.
Yes, thank you, Aitab, so much. I'm Ali Ghaddar. I just want first to introduce myself. I'm Ali Ghaddar. I'm a researcher. I worked at the Beirut Urban Lab after I graduated in 2020. So I worked in the Beirut Urban Lab in the Karantina project, post-recovery project of the Karantina neighborhood, which is one of the impacted neighborhoods after the blast, and it's close to the port. So one of the proposal was to implement a project in public space, and it was one of the action plans in the strategic plan of the Karantina neighborhood. And the action plans was like to implement tactical like interventions within the neighborhood, so we can. One of the aims is like to build trust with the community and also to respond to their needs and to the vision that we crafted in the neighborhood. So if I want to speak about the project, like in relation to the theme of this workshop, like the most important issue is to build a trust with the community, to respond to their needs, and and not to impose ourselves as a researchers into the neighborhood. However, to build an incremental process of collaboration. Of collaboration in a project. So first of all, that I would likely to recommend to have like a participatory planning approach. And here we should not have like a very like a huge dream that we cannot change everything. However, it is incremental, and through the process we can learn what it works and what will might not work. So the most important issue also is like if the entire organizations or the entire NGOs focused on something, try to work in projects or in interventions that are collective, that can bring all the people together, or that can respond to a collective like vision or collective like need. So that's why our intervention was in public space after the port blast, because it responds to the approach of our to the Beirut Urban Lab, that in order to ensure a holistic urban recovery for any neighborhood, we should also respond to the recovery of public spaces, because they are to recover the socio-spatial practices of these spaces. So through the project, we adopted the participatory planning approach, and we collaborated with practitioners such as Aitab Shaib, And here through the design process. So the design of the public space was participatory. We held like different community meetings on the streets where people can join us and to design their public space. So and the collaboration with practitioners is very important because they can really guide us towards towards a space or the design of the space to be inclusive for all community members. However, as I mentioned before, that absolutely we cannot change the problems. We will not serve all the needs of all the people, but we can really respond to some extent, the huge extent to the people's need and to their aspirations. Also, to implement such kind of project, we should have like a good collaboration with funders and like at the management level to have a good management, at the local level with the people to have a good participation. Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. That's really helpful advice. And yeah, I mean, I perhaps didn't mention it, but at the heart of, you know, the approach to the network is collaboration and co-participation, also with people with disabilities in shaping the research agenda. So it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Can I ask Ali and Tab, this Beirut Urban Lab, is this something at AUB? What is it? It is at AUB.
It is AUB, yeah.
It's like a research group, or
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Beirut Urban Lab is a collaborative interdisciplinary research space. So locally, locally anchored. The lab investigates like historical and contemporary urbanization.
Okay.
So it's actually a research center, but at the same time it produces knowledge, but also it contributes to the city through interventions, either at like spatial interventions or interventions at the level of policy or tools or studies, etc.
And is Muna Fawaz involved with this?
Yeah, exactly. So the co-directors of the lab are Professor Muna Fawaz, Professor Huwaid Al-Harithi, Professor Muna Harib.
Okay, that's excellent.
And also Professor Ahmed Gharbiye.
Yeah, yeah. I think we should really link with this group. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to contribute something or share something of their work? If not, I'll hand back to you, Tab.
Yeah, thank you, Dina. I think now it's almost 1:20, so we will take 10 minutes break. We will come back by 1:30 Beirut time, which is, I think, how much? 12:30 your time. So we will come back 1:30. Take 10 minutes break, and then we will have, after that, session 2, where Dr. Maha Shuaib will be talking about the Center for Lebanese Studies and the impact of the center on making a change in the society. Also, later on, I will be talking about the Disability Hub and its impact as well, and the actions that we've done. Thank you. Right, just checking, Maha. اوكي، هلا نحن مبدئيا بهاي الجلسه حنكون مثل ما حكيت دكتور مها شعيب حتكون عم تحكينا عن مركز الدراسات اللبنانيه والأعمال اللي صارت كأبحاث أو كحملات توعية أو أي نشاط workshops ورشات عمل وكيف كان لها تأثير بالتغيير بالمجتمع تبعنا، وأحيانا إن كان التأثير ممكن يكون إيجابي أو ممكن يكون مرات سلبي. من بعدها برجع أنا بتطرق لموضوع محور الإعاقة والدمج وكيف اشتغلنا على موضوع الإعاقة والأنشطة اللي عملناها. بس أتأكد إنه دكتور مها صارت موجودة. يلا لحظة.
Hello, everyone. Apologies for the delay. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm just gonna start my presentation. 1 minute. Okay, I will share the screen. Okay, can you see?
You're sharing Zoom, Maha. You're sharing Zoom.
Can you see can see my screen now? Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today I will be giving an example of how we think about impact of the Center for Lebanese Studies. And this has been a constant issue that we're often debating, revisiting, and rethinking all the time since our foundations. For those of you who are not familiar about Center for Lebanese Studies, so we are a research organization established by a group of Lebanese diaspora in England, who were living in England. And in 1983, during the peak of the Lebanese Civil War, there was an attempt to bring together and establish a research center on social sciences. And it was seen that social sciences can help us, solve some of the issues that we are facing, maybe think about the post-war, understand the causes of conflict that happened in Lebanon. So the center was set up, and we had lots of academics and fellows at the center publishing lots of books. And in 2012, we opened an office in Lebanon, and it was in affiliation with the American University, LAU, Lebanese American University. And then we opened an office in Jordan, and now we are also at Cambridge. So our mission for us, it was very important that we conduct research that aims to promote equitable societies and equity and equality. That for us was very important, and to address the vulnerable groups and disadvantaged groups that are often overlooked. And our mission is to produce knowledge that allows us to promote equitable societies, understand the causes of conflict, and how we could promote social cohesion. But also for us, it was very important how we position ourselves concerning knowledge production, whether locally or globally, and our role in contributing to global knowledge as well. So this is our mission, and what we do. So the way we work, so you understand also how we seek to create impact. So we do research, produce research and knowledge, and we develop our research agenda with our partners, and we consult the local actors to understand whether this research agenda is addressing the local needs. And also, it's a very important priority for us is to contribute to developing research capacities and to provide a space for collectives and for to be an incubator for knowledge production and change, and to create and nurture long-term equitable partnerships. For us, it's very important that we are working with critical and equitable partners. And one way of developing and building research capacity is through fellowships, bursaries, and student scholarships. We also could do professional development training. And we tried and continue to try to inform policy practice through advocacy and dissemination. And over the past 5 years, we did a bit of work on producing MOOCs, massive online courses aimed at building, or contributing to research capacity. Okay, so for us, the values that impact is one of our values. For us, it's important that we are not just operating and producing knowledge in a silo, but our work is directly having an impact. And one way of doing it is by producing relevant research, by conducting our research in a collaborative manner, by being inclusive in all levels, whether in the research agenda or in the way we are communicating our research, being ethical, reflective, and transparent. So for us, as I said, we aim to produce critical knowledge, engage with the researchers, policy and praxis. So for us, it's important that we're not only talking to researchers, but we're also talking to policy actors and practitioners. And we want to create space for scholars and to work within the global North and South. And at the moment, we have 4 themes. The reason we chose these 4 themes is because they speak directly to our mission of issues around social justice, so education, migration, displacement, social movements, and disability. We're trying to focus on groups that are disadvantaged by the system as well, and to produce research that can feed to understanding how we could, improve the conditions and the structures for these groups. So how do we approach impact? So, it's interesting that many of our founding members were businessmen, but it was interesting their decision, which happened, some time ago, was to use social sciences. They saw social sciences as a very impactful way of understanding how things happen in the society and how it can lead to conflict, but also how it can lead to reconstruction. But there was always a tension internally between those who wanted the center to produce academic knowledge, while those who wanted to change things on the ground. And this was always a constant tension. I think now we're trying to reconcile these two objectives rather than seeing them as conflicting. So our longer term impact can be felt through our academic books and research that we do, but also by building research capacity, which will produce further knowledge on the region and about the region. And more directly also, we work on connecting our research to policy reform. So any findings that we have, we try to activate them into policy recommendations, into campaigns, sometimes with some success and sometimes with great failure. I mean, one example of a success and a failure was our work on citizenship education during 2010, where we managed to put a lot of our research findings into the National Strategy on Citizenship Education. But when we were participating in its development, we came up against, the nepotism and the corruption within the system. And as a result, we were sanctioned from, our research was impacted because, we resisted the kind of, the way the ministry wanted to do things at that time. And as a result, this compromised our ability to get permission to do research. And this made us think, maybe in our impact, we don't want to be involved in implementation, because then we are running against the system, which might impact our ability to do research itself. So this was an interesting experience. And then we thought, okay, so maybe we can lobby for change and policy reform, but stop there and not implement ourselves, but work with partners. One also very effective way of creating an impact was to support collectives, such as the Lebanese Association for History, the Disability Hub, CLS Scholars. And the idea is to bring together and establish and host these associations that have their own research agenda or their own reform agenda and change agenda. And finally, we do impact through advocacy. So this was a very, this was a very powerful way that we found our research can be really activated, but also it comes at a price. And some of you might have seen our recent, so these examples of our advocacy campaigns was on education, which led to some policy change. For instance, the restrictions applied on refugees. Once they turn 15, they need to have a residency in order to be able to sit for their official exams. And many of the Syrian children would drop at that age because they don't have residency. And 70% of refugees can't have residency in Lebanon. As a result, they can't continue their education despite all the money that's being invested into the system. So, so that's, we also did things around disability, elections, etc. And this comes at a price. So you probably have heard about our recent episode with the president of LAU, where the Ministry of Education put pressure, it seems, on severing the relationship between LAU and the Center for Lebanese Studies, because we had made social media campaign which upset the ministry at that time. So this is where impact can also have quite a a hefty price in some ways, but although we don't regret that, on in a context where there are increasing constraints on academic freedom. We've had a conversation in the centers, how do we measure impact? So some of us who see it in terms of quantitative, so the numbers of citations, the number of people who attended the workshop, etc., while others see it as actually it's qualitative. It's the kind of conversation that we start, it's the kind of groups, and it's the kind of different way of thinking that we also propagate. So, and these are some of the, when we asked our team to list what kind of impact, what is impact for them? For them, they saw it's the networks, the conversations, challenging the conventional wisdom, which we managed to push in certain fields, the dissemination of knowledge to wider groups, so not only academic circles, but the wider context, fostering public debate around issues that usually we don't talk about, but remain constrained within an elitist group, and provide evidence that can be used for policy decision, building capacity and networking. So this is our journey with impact. It has been in some ways a journey where we're learning our way through, we're experimenting with things rather than always knowing directly how we should go about it. And sometimes it worked very well, and then other times it had quite an impact in terms of the kind of the action that we got as a result of the kind of research or the knowledge that we are or were producing. I will stop here, and it would be lovely to share and get your questions and also learn from your experience about how you deal with impact, the kind of pushback against the impact also that you were trying, and the resistance that you also might face when you're trying to have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. Yes, Kumi.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Kumayil Khatib. I'm a Lebanon lead working with a British organization called Choose Love. We have an open call to support refugee leadership initiatives and organizations in MENA region called CRLM, and it's a group of donors came together to support refugees in the region. Thank you so much, Maha, for this amazing presentation. I think it's very important to see how to present the impact of the work of one organization that is working in kind of difficult and restricted environment. I'm facing like the same kind of difficulties around like how to measure the impact and how to adopt it within the strategy of the organization to be like more beneficial and provide more support to the target group of participants. My question is around like, and it can be in general, is around how you were able to adopt these impacts to kind of shift your strategy if you did that, to be like more flexible, and what might be the lesson learned from this process? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we're always in a constant conversation, and and we're always trying to think together, like, to what extent we want to be, for instance, confrontational, to what extent we want to be very blunt about our critique, to what extent, like how do we strategize our impact? And I think this is, and also how do we balance the impact that we aspire to achieve versus what the donor wants us to achieve, or the funder. And for us, and in some cases in research grants, some of these impact indicators are not always relevant to the population that we are working with. And for us, it's a challenge also to shift the traditions of research from being extractive. You just get the data and you move and you publish, and you never work with the population you are, the research is concerned with. So this has been a very difficult question, but I think for us, we have managed, and this is where I feel like network and relationships are very, very important. And I think it's probably an underestimated variable for impact, the kind of relationships that you create. And I feel that the thing that I'm most proud of in the center that we did is the kind of networks we've created, the collectives that we foster. And it's not easy. We don't have a culture of people working together, coming together. I mean, take disability as one example. When you have NGOs, competing for funding against each other. So how do you bring them together to have a shared a vision without being threatened? Also, how do you balance different perspectives of, some people are more radical than others in their agendas, so, to find a meeting point, I think this has been challenging, but also it's a kind of conversation this yields. It's very, very amazing. And having researchers who are engaging with this kind of debate is also very enriching. And this is why also social movement for us was very important as a topic, because we were interested in not only seeing how we can create impact, but also understanding how people mobilize, understanding how people are seeking to create a change, reform. So I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, I want to say, in some ways, we were also the victims of our success, like when we became very, like people are listening to us, then our message was being more painful for certain people, and hence there were sanctions that need to be implemented in order to silence us. So this is where I think it's interesting to talk about, the importance of also collectives, the importance of solidarity when we're talking about impact as well, because I think often we see it as an individual exercise, organizations doing it individually. And I think maybe we also need to talk about collective impact as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Maha. Any questions? Okay, I think then I will, Huda?
Yes. Hello. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Huda Faour. I'm an independent researcher, and I have a question. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Kiwan and Dr. Shaib for the valuable information. I noticed that the participants belong research groups or sorry?
Sorry,
I think we should, yes, switch off our mic.
Someone needs to mute themselves. Okay. Sorry, Huda.
Okay, no worries. So I assume that the projects that they're working on are funded. Now, my question is about the non-funded research. How we can reach the stakeholders actually to ensure that the outcomes of the work, the research work can be useful, and we can see actually the impact. For example, in my dissertation work, I was working, part of my doctoral work was related to curriculum analysis. And in particular, I analyzed 7 mathematics textbooks, the national curriculum. Because for these textbooks, actually, these textbooks have not been reformed since 1997, sorry. But I'm not sure if the curriculum developers or teachers or the Ministry of Education can have access to my work or the results. Not only me, of course, but the work of my colleagues. So the question is about the non-funded research. How can we reach the stakeholders or the people can benefit from the I remember Dr. Kiwan mentioned that the funded projects should contribute to the at least one of the goals set by the funders. But since many of the work, like I'm working now in 2 papers, they are not funded, independent work with my friend. So how can we reach the stakeholders actually? This is the question. Because we don't have this work or relationships with the right people. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Huda. And this is a very, very interesting and important question. And, you know, it's, I mean, you know, this is even more difficult in a context where policy actors are not interested a lot in the research that is being produced, but also not necessarily the research that we want to, that's produced locally as well. You know, when I look some of the policy documents by the ministry, you see lots of references are being made to scholars from outside the region. But this is where I think the important role of networks and scholarly networks, because I'm not saying that the necessarily policy actors will listen to it, but I think, you know, at least if we mobilize collectively and we have a space for sharing our knowledge, at least, you know, if there's an interest in picking up this knowledge, there's a higher chance of it being picked up. And this is why I think it's important to have these collectives and these conversations. I don't think, you know, that all of the, you know, I've been doing research for the past 15 years. I don't think that, yes, you know, like policy actors are listening directly or reading our research, to be honest. I doubt very much. I think what bothers them the most is social media, not, you know, like that's what they pick on rather than, you know, they read a piece of research and say, oh, that's interesting, we need to address this gap. So, I think there's a big, you know, like there's a cultural change that we need to work on, at least in our context, to see how we can produce research that could be impactful, or also how we could do policy that's informed by research. And that would require a lot of longer term work that needs to be done collectively.
Yeah, thank you, Maha. And I think if I will as well يعني my presentation will also talk or focus on the importance of the media and social media once we do certain research or advocacy, and maybe Huda writing an article in one of the newspapers about your work, about your findings, they might highlight something, and this will lead me to start presenting the work that we've done with the media, and we'll take it from there. 1 minute, I'll just share my presentation. Okay, sorry. Is it, yeah. أنا حأحكي بالعربي. مبدئياً حأحكي عن دكتور مها شعيب حكت عن مركز الدراسات اللبنانية. أنا حأحكي عن القسم الثاني بمركز الدراسات اللبنانية اللي هو Disability Hub أو محور الإعاقة بالدمج، واللي هو تأسس بال 2018. وكان عندنا من مجموعة أشخاص ناشطين من مجال الإعاقة والدمج، هن أشخاص عندهم إعاقات أو ما كان عندهم إعاقات بس عندهم نفس الرؤية والهدف. الأهداف تبعنا الأساس وقت تأسست كانت المساهمة بإنتاج معرفة وأبحاث علمية عن الإعاقة والدمج. وهون لقينا إنه بلبنان أو بعالمنا العربي في نقص بالمعلومات البحثية عن مجال الإعاقة، فما عندنا أرقام، ما عندنا إحصائيات، ما عندنا دراسات معمقة بتمثلنا الوضع الراهن للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. فكمان من الأهداف الثانية كان فتح منتدى بيشمل منظمات الإعاقة المحلية والدولية وكل من ما عنده اهتمام بمجال الإعاقة بالدمج لمناقشة قضايا الإعاقة وأوضاعها والسياسة العامة والقوانين المتعلقة لكيفية إدماجهم بالمجتمع ونيلهم لكامل حقوقهم. كمان من الأهداف كان في تحليل السياسات والقوانين المتعلقة بمجال الإعاقة والدمج ومراقبتها، وهذا هون أساس كتير إنه مراقبة شو عم بيصير وين إحنا واصلين للوصول لخدمات دامجة بلبنان ودول الشرق الأوسط، والعمل نحو تغيير نمط مفهوم الإعاقة، لأنه هو مفهوم الإعاقة حالياً بمجتمعنا هو بيطلع على المفهوم الطبي أو المفهوم الرعائي، والسير قدما للمفهوم الاجتماعي والحقوقي للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. فمن هون من بعد ما أنشئ الديسابيليتي هاب صار في ويب سايت، في بلاتفورم انعمل للديسابيليتي هاب، واللي هو بيحكي عن الأبحاث اللي عم تنعمل، عن المكتب اللي شوف فيه أبحاث انعملت بهذا المجال، وعملنا يعني دائما في تجديد، وهلا في مرحلة لازم عم نشتغل على تجديد المراجع الموجودة والأبحاث. حملات التوعية والأويرنس، طبعا من الإيفنتس في أشياء كان إنه مثل ورش عمل والأعضاء وكيف ممكن والبارتنرز تبعولنا، وفي دايركتوري عن الجمعيات الموجودة بالعالمنا العربي بلبنان والمناطق حوالينا حسب الإعاقات. فهون يعني إذا الأهل بدهم أو أي أشخاص باحثين أو أي حدا بحب يعرف أكثر عن الجمعيات، في عنا دايركتوري بالمؤسسات الموجودة. هلا كمجال اشتغلنا على 3 محاور. عملنا حملات توعية عن مواضيع تخص الإعاقة، عملنا إصدارات ومقالات وأبحاث علمية وحتى إرشادات هندسية بهالمجال، وفي عنا ورش تدريب. هلا حأعطي بعض الأمثلة عن أشياء عملناها وكيف كان لها تأثير. مثلا لاحظنا كثير بمجتمعاتنا انه عندنا دائما العبارات والمصطلحات المستخدمه على بكتاباتنا بحكينا بخطاباتنا اليوميه بتكون دائما هي مشحفه بحق الاشخاص ذوي الاعاقه، واحيانا بتقلل من قدراتهم او بترفعهم كثير. فهون اشتغلنا على بالبدايه على بوستر انعمل ملصق وحكى عن وضح انه هالكلام ليه هو غلط أو ليه هو صح. طبعاً رجعنا للمفهوم الطبي للإعاقة وحتى حكينا عنه، والمفهوم الاجتماعي للإعاقة، وعطينا أمثلة بهذا البوستر. حتى الصور اللي استخدمناها كانت عم بتركز عن المعوقات، البيئة المحيطة بالشخص اللي هي عم بتعوقه ليوصل للخدمات. فكمان كان في شق هندسي بالبوستر من التركيز على البيئة المحيطة هندسيا. هذا الملصق حقق كتير نجاح، وبالتالي الأونر تواصلت معنا وطلبوا منا إنه هن كانوا بدهم يدربوا فريق العمل عندهم على المواضيع متعلقة بالمصطلحات والكلام، وكيف لازم يكون الكلام المرتبط بالإعاقة كلام مدروس مضبوط. وبالتالي نحن وياهم اشتغلنا على إنتاج فيديو مبني على البوسترز والشخصيات نفسها اللي كانت بالملصق، هن استخدمناها بالانيميشن بالفيديو. وطبعا كان الهدف انه الفيديو يكون دامج كمحتوى اعلامي، يكون دامج، فاستخدمنا لغة الإشارة، كان عندنا توصيف صوتي للمحتوى المسموع، وكان عندنا سبتايتلز وكابشنينج كتابة لكمان المحتوى المسموع مكتوب بالنص باللغتين العربية والإنجليزي. هلا هذا طبعا شاركناه هون اهميه قد ايه وسائل الاعلام، واذا عم نحكي عن ارقام فتم انتاج هاي الحمله مثل ما حكينا، وتقريبا المشاهده انعرضت على السوشيال ميديا. انا عم بعطي بس اكزامبل على اليوتيوب قد ايه شافوها، تقريبا 7500 شخص. حاليا او بس من تقريبا بشهر نيسان السنة هاي كمان أصدرنا باليوم العالمي للتوعية عن التوحد. كمان هون مثل ما حكي دكتور مها أهمية المشاركة مع أشخاص تانيين، فتعاوننا مع جمعية الأهل للتوحد بلبنان لإنتاج حملة توعية باليوم العالمي للتوحد ب 2 نيسان 2023. وكان في كحملة كان في عنا انفوجرافيكس معلومات عن المصطلحات اللي ترتبط كمان بالشخص اللي عنده توحد، واللي دائما بيوصفوا له المرض، وهو طبعا التوحد منه مرض. الشيء الثاني كان شو السمات اللي موجودة بالشخص اللي عنده توحد، وقد ايه أهمية المعرفة المبكرة عن الطفل اللي عنده توحد على أساس إمكانية مساعدته لتلبية احتياجاته فيما بعد. وكمان كان في معلومات عن البيئة الهندسية، وقت بدي صمم بيئة هندسية لشخص عنده توحد كيف بدها تكون هي البيئة، وشو أشياء بدي أتجنبها، وشو الأشياء اللي بدي أحطها متوفرة بالتصميم. فهاي الحملة انعملت كفيديو وانعملت كإنفوجرافيكس، وتقريبا حاليا بس عم نحكي عن شهر كان في 6500 ألف مشاهدة على الفيسبوك. نزلنا كمان من الأشياء اللي عملناها كتيب وقت صارت انفجار بيروت، ولاحظنا بعملية الإغاثة اللي صارت على الأرض ما كان في أبدا اهتمام بموضوع الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. كم عندنا أشخاص يمكن كان عندهم إعاقة وتعرضوا للانفجار وشو صار معهم، أو أشخاص ما كانوا عندهم إعاقات وبناء على الانفجار صار عندهم إعاقات، فكيفية عملية إغاثتهم، أو الأشخاص الساكنين المحيطين بهذه المنطقة وسكنهم تعرض للأذى، كيف بيصير في عنا تلبية احتياجاتهم. فهون كان في حملة نزلنا كتاب إرشادات عن هذا الموضوع، واللي هو بالبداية نزل ل 2500 شخص طلعوا عليه. من بعدها نحن رجعنا هذا الكتاب بعد ما صار الزلزال بتركيا، وصار عنا كمان بسوريا وكمان بلبنان، رجعنا طبعنا الكتيب. أنا حاليا مقيمة بتركيا، فأنا تعاونت مع المدرسة مدرسة بنتي وطبعنا وعطيناهم هذا الكتيب، حتى وزعنا للأخوة البيضاء كمان بعثنا لهم الكتيب في حال انه بسوريا كمان يصير في إغاثة الاشخاص اللي تعرضوا للأذى من خلال الزلزال. بالنسبة للإعلام لاحظنا كتير كمان إنه الأشخاص الصحفية وقت يكونوا عم بيحكوا بيكون هدفهم نبيل يستضيفوا شخص عنده إعاقة، ولكن مرات بيكون اللغة المستخدمة، الأسلوب، الشفقة اللي بتنعرض على التلفزيون إلى ما هنالك، وإنه تكون قصة تأثر بالناس. لاحظنا في أشياء خاطئة عم تعتمد، فكان في ضرورة لنعمل ورشة عمل عن كيف تكون الإعلام دامج، شو اللغة المصطلحات المستخدمة، وأكيد بناء على الاتفاقية الأمم المتحدة اللي هي بتركز كمان على المحتوى الإعلامي كيف يكون دامج. فهاي ورشة عمل اشتغلنا عليها من 24 أكتوبر ل 5 نوفمبر 2000 وهاي السنة 22. دربنا 60 متدرب. كانوا أشخاص أول شيء عندهم في أشخاص ما عندهم إعاقات بيشتغلوا بمجال الإعلام، وكمان أخذنا الطلاب اللي عم يدرسوا بمجال الإعلام ودكاترتهم كمان كانوا مشاركين معنا. كان في ورشتين عمل، يعني كل مجموعة أخذت ورشتين عمل وكل ورشة أخذت يومين. طبعا نحن وقت عملنا دعاية انه كان بدنا ناخذ العدد، اجانا فوق 350 متسجل، بس نحن حسب الفندنج اللي كان معنا بس كنا قادرين نغطي 60 شخص، فاضطرينا نختار بس الاشخاص المرتبطين بالاعلام. هلا من بعد ما خلصت هاي ورشة العمل طبعا كان التفاعل، يعني خلال الورشة العمل التفاعل من أول نهار حضروا الورشة كان كتير سعيدين، والتعاون والأفكار اللي انطرحت كانت كتير غنية. ومن بعدها بس خلصنا الوركشوب عملوا مجموعة على الواتساب جروب، وكانوا حاليا عندنا 49 شخص. ومن وقتها صاروا كتير يتناولوا يعني مشاركات بالاشياء اللي عم ينتجوها اللي متعلقة بتغيير المفهوم نحو الإعاقة. وهون أنا حأعطي أمثلة، بعض الأمثلة من أعمالهم. ففي عنا مثلا صحفية ماريانا عندس عملت تقرير كتبته عن كيف نصنع مجتمع دامج ما دامت لغة الإشارة غير متوفرة. طبعا هي كان هدفها تكتب عن أهمية لغة الإشارة. وهون نحن موجودين، المدربين موجودين معنا على المجموعة، فعم بيصير دائما في تواصل معنا، وهي التشبيك وأهميته. فلما يكون عندهم موضوع بدهم يحكوا فيه بيرجعوا لنا نحن يعني اللي عندنا مجال بموضوع الإعاقة، وبياخذوا حسب اختصاصاتنا شو الموضوع، ونحن هون بننصحهم مع مين بدهم يتواصلوا. فهون مثلا تم التواصل مع شخص بالأردن كمان لنضوي على لغة الإشارة بالدول العربية، وكمان تم التواصل مع كمان لغة الإشارة أو المتخصصين بلبنان كمان. كمان من الاشياء اللي عملوها ليال نصر عملت عن طيف التوحد، الكرامة للجميع مهما كان الاختلاف، وكمان مقالها ضوى على موضوع طيف التوحد وشو الخدمات الموجودة بالبلد وشو اللي بيحتاجوا فيه ليصيروا مدمجين كليا بالمجتمع. كمان من الفيديوهات اللي صارت من بعد الدورة عن موضوع المصطلحات. فهون بفتكر صحفية كان اسمها فاطمة عملت ريبورتاج صارت تسأل فيه الأشخاص عن المصطلحات، شو بيستخدموا مصطلحات لما بيحكوا عن شخص عنده إعاقة. وطبعا هي من خلالها صارت تفرجي قديش المجتمع أحيانا ما زال يستخدم مصطلحات قد تكون فيها إساءة للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. اوكي. كمان من الاشياء اللي صارت انكتب عن ورشه الاعلام، اللي شاركوا بورشه الاعلام كتبوا عنه. وكانوا كمان عم يطرحوا انه نحن بحاجه لورشه عمل اكثر بهذا المجال لتضم كل المؤسسات، يعني يمكن هن كانوا جزء من مؤسسات الاعلام بس كان بيهمهم انه كل المؤسسات الاعلاميه من رأسها لكل موظفينا تاخذ هيك دورات تدريبية بالموضوع هذا. هلا بالاخر كيف فينا نتواصل؟ هلا يعني بجوز هدى سألت او حدا تاني بحب يتواصل عنده موضوع مثلا بحب يحكي عنه بمجال ما، نحن صار عندنا طالما عملوا المجموعة صار عندنا تواصل معهم، وأكيد فيكم تتواصلوا معنا نحطكم على تواصل معهم لوسائل الإعلام. وشكرا. هلا اكيد بنطرح، يمكن نحن هلا عنا يعني بدنا ناخذ البريك على 2:30، تقريبا عنا مجال شي 10 دقائق ربع ساعه اذا في استفسارات معينه او مشاركات.
أنا ممكن أسأل سؤال؟
تفضل علي.
شكرا كثير عتاب لكل الشغل يلي عم تشتغليه، خاصة مع يلي عندهم disabilities، وكيف كمان انه ممكن تغيري هالمفاهيم يلي مربوطة بتقاليدنا انه عند disabled people. قد ايه عم تلاحظي انه هالميديا از تول قادرة تغير نظرة العالم للdisabled people وكيف ينظروا لهم، لانه انت عم you are tackling the mindset، والمايند سيت rooted بالعالم، خاصة بمناطقنا بالريجن يلي نحن عايشين فيه، نظرة مختلفة انه هن يمكن غير عنا. فكيف قادرة عن جد through the social media عم تلاقي قادرة تغير من المايند سيت تعول العالم؟
شكرا علي، سؤال كتير مهم. وأكيد هو حسب ما لاحظنا أنه الإعلام هلأ بيلعب دور أساسي بتغيير نمط التفكير كمان، لأنه خصوصا السوشيال ميديا بعد على أكثر كمان. هلأ صراحة مثلا ورشة العمل اللي عملناها من أول نهار نحن بلشنا نشوف التغيير بين الصحف اللي كانوا موجودين اللي عم يحضروا، إنه طبعا لما ترجع لهم شو أكيد هي ما في نية مسبقة إنه الإساءة للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، لكن هو مفهوم مجتمع كيف بينظرون بشفقة إلى ما هنالك. فوقتها وضحنا ليش هيدا المصطلح خاطئ، وليه إنه يا منكبرهم كتير ومنعملهم عظماء يا إما منقلل كتير من شأنهم. فكان كتير لما أعطينا أمثلة، وصراحة نحن كنا عاملين جردة للمقالات المكتوبة ولبرامج التلفزيون اللي بتنحكى وعرضناها لهم. فلما صاروا يشوفوا اتيكيت التعامل مع الاشخاص ذوي الاعاقه، وكان الحلو بورشه العمل انه وقت عملناها كان نص الاشخاص المدربين عندهم اعاقات، متخصصين وناشطين حقوقيين وناشطين بمجال الإعاقة. وهون كان حلو إنه التفاعل كان كتير إيجابي بين المشاركين المتدربين والمدربين. وقت ضوينا على كيف نظرة المجتمع إلى ما هنالك، فصراحة تاني نهار رجعوا لنا إنه كلهم فتحوا الديبيت مع أهاليهم وصاروا يحاولوا أهاليهم وإخواتهم والعائلة تبعهم إنه لا، ما فيك تحكي هاي الكلمة خاطئة، لازم تقول هاي. فصراحة يعني من أول نهار قالوا نحن بلشنا نغير بالبيئة اللي حوالينا. بعتقد هذا كتير أساسي. يعني هلأ هي it's a long process، تاخد وقت. وأنا بعتقد أقدر غير مفاهيم بدي بلش من المدرسة. مثل ما هلا بنحكي بكتير امور بحقوق الطفل الى ما هنالك، المدرسه لها دور اساسي بتغيير تفكير الاطفال بمجال الاعاقه. والاعلام مثل ما قلت بيساعد. فصراحه قدروا من بعد ما اخذوا هاي الدوره مثل ما قلت لك غيروا بالمحيط تبعهم وبشغلهم ببيئتهم وكمان بإنتاجهم. يعني من وقتها لهلا صار عندي يمكن أكثر من 20-30 عمل مقابلات. يمكن أنا حطيت أمثلة، بس بعد صاروا عم يعملوا مقابلات على الراديو، مقابلات تلفزيونية، يضووا على هالمجال. عم بيختاروا الأيام، مثلا بيطلعوا على الكالندر وبيطلعوا شو اليوم، شو عندي يوم عالمي لأي نوع من الإعاقة تضوي عليها. هلا يمكن في إعاقة الداون سيندروم، هلا يعني في كذا حدا تواصل معنا بدهم يشتغلوا على هذا المجال إعلاميا، عم بيفكروا لليوم العالمي للإعاقة شو بده يصير. فبقول لك لا، عم بيصير في تغيير، ولكن أكيد بدنا شغل طويل بعد أكثر من هيك. بس برجع بقول يمكن الإعلام، المدارس لها كمان دور كتير أساسي. شكرا.
شكرا.
عتاب.
مرحبا مرة تانية. كان بدي أسأل أول شيء على سيرة الإمباكت، بس بحب أقول شارك مع الموجودين. هو موضوع إنه أنا كمان بستفيد من الشيء اللي أنتم بتعملوه. هيدا نوع من الإمباكت اللي هو كل شيء إصدارات وببليكيشنز عملتوها خاصة بالإعاقة، أنا بستفيد منها لفرجي طلابي على المصطلحات وعلى بعض الأمور المهمة، وفرجيهم إنتاج الديسابيليتي هاب بشكل دايم. فهذا this is kind of impact أكيد. هيدا example. وتاني شيء بالنسبة لموضوع الإمباكت كمان، ده برأيك مهم موضوع القوانين والبوليسيز المفروض تحطها الدولة لحتى تخلي هذا الموضوع موجود أكثر. يعني لما بتكون المدارس بأغلبيتها دامجة بقوانين الدولة، مش برأيك هذا بيكون إمباكت بيساعدكم أكثر،
طبعا
بيسرع الموضوع؟ ونفس الشيء بإكزامبلز تانيين، لأي درجة القوانين لها دور والتشريعات لها دور بهذا الموضوع؟ Thank you.
شكرا عتاب. أكيد القوانين هي الأساس الصراحة، وحاليا على فكرة عم نكتب، عم نشتغل على بحث يؤرخ حركة الإعاقة بلبنان. فهيدا البحث هلا عم نشتغل عليه، إن شاء الله بشهر 1 مفروض يخلص. عم بيأرخ بالتاريخ امتى بلشت حركة الإعاقة بلبنان وشو أنتج عنا وكيف هالناشطين بهالمجال قدروا اشتغلوا ليطلعوا القانون 220. إلا ما هنالك إنه قانون 220 قد ايه انشغل وقت انعمل، مين عمله، كيف كانت الابروتش تبعه، هل كان طبي، لأنه تعريف القانون 220 طبي
كتير
لموضوع الإعاقة. والناشطين بعدين كيف اشتغلوا على تغيير إنه أو عم بيشتغلوا لتعديل
عم يشتغلوا
القانون حاليا ومين هن ومن بعدها قصة CRPD والقانون الدولي، واللي صراحة انشغل عليه من وقت ما نزل CRPD من 2006. كتير كان في عمل بناء أو عمل كتير من الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة والمنظمات لتشتغل على أنه لبنان يمشي بإقرار هذا القانون. وللأسف ما صار شيء بس إلا لما اجت سارة منقارة، واللي هي كانت نائبة بايدن بمجال الإعاقة.
بعرفها شخصيا.
بتعرفيها. فهي اللي قدرت عملت هذا التغيير. يعني مرات منحاول نغير كمنظمات وجمعيات وإلى ما هنالك، بس قد ايه الامباكت عم بيصير هون. اجى حدا من برا، بس كونها لبنانية قدرت ضغطت.
مزبوط.
كونها لبنانية أمريكية طبعا،
مستشارة الرئيس جو بايدن
مستشارة الرئيس.
فإجا
القرار من برا، فمرات بتحسي يعني للأسف. بس منيح اللي طلع، يعني آخر شيء بتقولي منيح اللي هيك. هلأ هون الشغل وهذا كمان بدنا نعمل اجتماع للديسابيليتي هاب مع بعدين لنناقش مع الجمعيات كلياتها كيف بدنا نعدل قانون 220 ليصير ملائم مع الاتفاقية الدولية للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. فهي كمان مرحلة يمكن بدها تاخد وقت 3-4 سنين ما بعرف. فلازم كمان يكون في تعاون. وهون بدنا نعمل راوند تيبل ديسكشن كمان، بنرجع بندعي إلها لنناقش كيف في طريقة لنشتغل على تعديل القوانين. فالقوانين كتير مهمة وكتير أساسية، وأهم كمان أنا بقول القانون أساسي، بس الانفورسمنت وهي الضغط
تنفيذه
هو الأساس. وهون قد ايه بده يرجع للقضاء ورفع يعني لازم يكون وقت نعمل قانون تيكون قانون عن جد فعال، في مجال للشخص يشتكي وقت يكون حاسس فيه خرق. هيدا بالقانون 220 ما كان موجود هيدا الحق.
بس تطبيقية ولا له أي شيء خاصه تنفيذ، يعني بشكل مجرد هيكل قانوني.
إضافة إنه وقت كمان بدنا نفعل القوانين لازم تكون كل وزارة إلى شأن بحسب الموضوع. أما بالقانون 220 فهو حاطط يعني مفتوح المجال أو بس موجودة بوزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية. وهون بنرجع للمفهوم الطبي والرعائي. فأكيد هذا المفهوم بده يتغير. فأكيد القوانين مهمة، لكن كمان قد إيه في طريقة إنه تنفيذها على الأرض.
للأسف. شكرا.
شكرا. هدى.
مرحبا مرة تانية. شكرا دكتورة عتاب. كنت بس بدي مثل أعلق على موضوع اللي حكيتيه عن الإعلاميين اللي شاركوا بالورك شوب، وإنه دايما ممكن التعامل مع ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة أو ذوي الإعاقة بيكون في حسن نية، بس بيكون في نوع من الشفقة. هلأ يمكن كمان التعامل معهم بنوع في شفقة هو رد فعل كمان على الأشخاص اللي بيتعاملوا بتنمر، سواء كانوا تلاميذ بالمدارس، لأنه كان عندي فترة علمت فيها بالمدارس، أو حتى أوقات من أشخاص بالغين مثل بالمزح أو بالنكت بيكون في تنمر بشكل مقصود أو لا. فبالتالي في طرف تاني بيروح أكتر للشفقة، يعني بيخلطوا بين التعاطف مع الأشخاص وبين الشفقة. فهل عندكم شيء ما بعرف بوسترز أو بروجكتس جايين عن طريقة التعامل، توعية لطريقة التعامل الصحية إذا بدنا نقول، اللي ما بتكون على طرف بين التنمر وبين الشفقة، يعني على الإكستريمز؟
هلا نحن إيه أكيد في سؤال تاني بعد هدى قبل ما أجاوب.
بس هي كرمال تكون هي الطريقة الصحيحة للأشخاص نتعامل مع سواء أطفال أو بالغين من ذوي الاحتياجات، وبالتالي أكيد تنعكس على صحتهم، لأنه مثل ما الشخص اللي عم يتنمر عليه عم يأذيه، الشخص اللي عم يتعامل معه بمعاملة كتير خاصة فيها كتير من الشفقة كمان عم يأذيه. بس شكرا.
أكيد سؤال كتير مهم. طبعا نحن مفكرين بهذا الشيء. جزء من ورشة العمل اللي صارت أو هذا المشروع تبع الإعلام كان في إنه سياسة، كيف تكون في سياسة إعلامية دامجة. فأصدرنا، بس هلا بس بدنا نعمل يعني بتوقع بدنا نحدد التاريخ اللي ننشر بوليسي لها علاقة بكل الإعلام الدامج، كيف بده يكون، أو سياسة إعلام دامج. من بيناتها، وأكيد حنحطها على البلاتفورم تبعنا، من بيناتها المصطلحات، ومن بيناتها اتيكيت التعامل والنظرة المجتمع إلى ما هنالك. هلا نحن كنا بورشة العمل عطينا أمثلة بمجتمعنا، يعني أمثلة موجودة عنا بنحكيها مسيئة، يعني بالكالتشر بثقافتنا، لأنه يمكن كان موضوع الإعاقة جديد، فبنستخدم مصطلحات، بنستخدم أمثلة بتكون كمان مسيئة. فهي وهلأ نحن بنلاحظ بيننا قد ما حكينا عنهم، فوقت يكونوا عم بيحكوا معنا شخص دغري بينتبهوا انه، او مثل الأطرش بالزفة مثلا، هاي كتير موجودة عنا بمجتمعنا، بنقولها كتير ولكن هي مسيئة جدا. فحتى بين بعض لما صرنا نحكي صار في انتباه أكثر، اللي حضروا ورشة العمل صاروا ينتبهوا على تجنب كمان هالأمثلة اللي هي موجودة بالمجتمع. فأكيد هاي البوليسي وقتها تطلع، هي نحن ناطرين نصدرها، هي تم جهزناها، ولكن ناطرين نصدرها وقت يصير في عنا بعد جزء متعلق بورشة الإعلام في 3 مجموعات من الطلاب من 3 جامعات. عنا LAU وسال وفي عندي الجامعة اللبنانية. 3 جامعات عم يشتغلوا كطلاب إعلام على إنتاج 3 أفلام توعوية عن حق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، والمنتج لازم يكون كمان كله دامج كمحتوى. والمواضيع الثلاثة في حق التعلم خصوصا بالأزمة اللي مرق فيها لبنان، وفي العيش باستقلالية، وثالث موضوع في حالة الطوارئ خصوصا بعد ما صار في عنا زلازل أو انفجار بيروت، إنه كيفية التعامل مع أشخاص ذوي إعاقة وحقهم. طبعا كل الأفلام مربوطة بالحقوق الموجودة بالCRPD اللي هي الاتفاقية الدولية للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. فوقتها ينتجوا هالأفلام. يعني هلأ الطلاب مشغولين بإنتاجهم، المفروض إنه إن شاء الله بآخر 6 يكون في انتهوا من هذا الشيء. وأكيد ساعتها حنعطي البوليسي مع الأفلام وحنعمل مؤتمر صحفي نحكي عن هذا الموضوع وأهميته. وأكيد ساعتها هالبوليسي بتصير موجودة قدامكم وفيكم تستندوا إلى كمان من ناحية السلوكيات والتعامل وشو الصح وشو الغلط. شكرا. أسئلة تانية؟ اوكي، اذا ما في استفسارات تانية نحن فينا.
مرحبا.
ايه هاي
أنا آلاء. أنا صبية عندها disability. أوكي، physical disability. على قصة الإعلام الدامج، في شخص حكى لي من فترة بيعمل معي انترفيو. كان عم يحكيني على من منطلق إنه مش شخص ذوي إعاقة، كان يحكيني ذوي الهمم أو الاحتياجات الخاصة. فوانس غيرت له المفهوم تاعيله بطل يتواصل معي. إنه ليك لأي درجة في أشخاص ما بتعرف، أو إيفن إذا غيرتي لها الفكرة تاعيلتها يعتبروا إنك ما بعرف عم تتعدى عليهم أو ما عم بتوصل لنا الرسالة. فعن جد it was so weird ومنه شيء حلو أبدا، لأنه بلا ما يكون عم يشتغل الإعلام بطريقة صح، إذا ما كان الشخص اللي عنده إعاقة عم بيوصل الرسالة اللي هن بدهم إياها ما بيطلعوها على الإعلام. وهذا الشيء كثير صرت شايفيته، لأنه كثير مثلا كذا مرة جربت أطلع على الإعلام بكون عم بحكي عن الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة بطريقة confident، بطريقة إنه لا ذوي الهمم ولا أطفال، بس بنفس الوقت شخص مثل حيالله شخص ثاني قادر يوصل رسالة معينة بالمجتمع إذا هو حابب. بس الإعلام للأسف على طول عم بيوجهها بالطريقة الغلط. فيا ريت نقدر مع الوقت نكون عم نشتغل أكثر وأكثر على هذا الموضوع.
شكرا كتير 100%. وهي صارت معي كمان. كان في مرة بدي أعمل حدا بده يكتب شيء بحثي عن الموضوع صحفية، وتناقشت بتقلي ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة، فقلت لها أنا لا، وكنت عم بحاول أقول إنه أشخاص ذوي الإعاقة وعم بحاول أشرح، ما عطتني مجال وهيك. هلا للأسف ليه عم بيكونوا وسائل الإعلام هيك؟ لأنه مجلس الوزراء أصدر مصطلحات استخدم فكرة الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. هو وقتها من دون استشارة المؤسسات والأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة طلع هو على باله إنه هذه هي الكلمة المضبوطة وفيها نص خطي. فمثلا النهار واللي بيشتغلوا بالنهار كأعطيكي مثل بيرفضوا إنه يغيروا أي كلمة، وبعضهم بيكتبوها الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. ليه؟ لأنه بناء لمجلس الوزراء طلع بهاي المصطلح. وبالتالي هون هلا وقت نطلق نحن لبنان مضى على الاتفاقية الدولية، بما انه مضى يعني انه هو ملزم فيها، وبالتالي التعريف اللي اجى من الاتفاقية الدولية هو اللي لازم لبنان يصير يلحقه. فبالتالي كلمة people with disabilities او الشخص اولا ثم الإعاقة هي اللي بدها تصير معتمدة، وبناء عليه حيتغير. وهذا حيلزم إعادة تغيير القرار اللي موجود عند مجلس الوزراء. ومثل ما قلنا من بعدها هون صار الانفورسمنت، إذا صارت إجا من هذا الأساس ساعتها المصطلح حيكون صحيح. لكن هو بدنا نرجع ما وراء المصطلح، إنه المصطلح ليه هو مستخدم وليه يعني إعلاميا بيحاولوا يكبروا الشخص ذوي الهمم أو ما بعرف شو. حتى الإمارات هلأ هي حاليا بصدد تغيير المصطلح، اللي هي الإمارات اللي طلعت فيه وعم بيشتغلوا على تغييره. بس هي بيرجع لفكرة الإعاقة نفسها إجت من نظرة سلبية، وما انربطت بالمعوق البيئي المحيط بالشخص، انربطت بالشخص نفسه. فبالتالي بعض الأشخاص بيرفضوها حتى يستخدموا أشخاص ذوي إعاقة لأنه مفهوما خاطئ عن المعوق الأساسي لإدماجهم بالمجتمع. فعنا شغل كتير بهالمجال.
صح، شكرا كثير. حتى ايفن يمكن الاشخاص اللي عندهم اعاقه ما بيعرفوا انه هدول التيرمز اللي لازم تنقال
100%.
يعطيكم العافيه.
شكرا كتير. نحن هلا حناخد بريك، بنرجع على الساعة 3 إن شاء الله. شكرا. We will be start recording soon. So our last speaker in this session is Dr. Catherine Braun, and she will give us a brief like a case study of the impact. So she will of the projects that she worked on. So Catherine.
Okay, thank you so much. I will try to share my screen and see if I can make it like that. Can you see that? And I will turn off the video. Yes. So thank you so much for the discussion so far today. And I will now talk about research on impact in a way. This work comes out of a study that CLS did with the Arab Reform Initiative on research funded by the International Development Research Center in Canada on youth civic engagement. And we looked at the understanding that researchers and research participants had of impact in their projects in a way. So let me see if I can change. Yes. The background of this work was a series of different research programs that the IDRC were running on new social movements, global protest and civic engagement led by youth, and successes and failures of this work. And one of the questions they wanted to get some feedback on was how knowledge is being produced with youth civic activists to affect social and political change, and what are the internal and external impacts of this knowledge production process. So together with the Arab Reform Initiatives, we did the overview of different programs that the IDRC worked on, but we focused particularly on 3 different research projects in 3 different regions of the world to look into the way that researchers had worked with impact in what we called engaged scholarship, which I will come back to in a little while. So the 3 projects that we were analyzing was a project in Colombia by Universidad ICESI called Builders of Peace, which worked on strategies of Afro-descendant youth and women for sustainable peace in urban Colombia. We also worked on a project in Zimbabwe by the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust. They were running a project called Strengthening Constructive and Active Youth Engagement in Civic Processes in Zimbabwe. And the 3rd project that we analyzed was by the Arab Reform Initiative and was titled Arab Youth as Political Actors, Strengthening Resilience Through New Forms of Engagement. So together, all these projects worked in a sort of active way on with youth in different ways. And I want to go through some of this, but I want to start perhaps a little bit with the methodology that we used and also some conceptual clarifications around engaged scholarship. So in order to do this research on research, we did the literature review on principles and methodologies of engaged scholarship. We interviewed IDRC staff. We interviewed researchers associated with the projects, 6 researchers across the 3 projects. And we also interviewed some of the research participants in Zimbabwe, Algeria, Tunisia, and Syria. And we also did an evaluation of some of the outputs and outcomes. And in this presentation, I will talk mainly about some of the reflections that the researchers had and some of the reflections that the research participants had around these research projects. But before that, let me start with just a few notes on what we mean by engaged scholarship in this context. Engaged scholarship is a mode of study for civic engagement, and in the particular context that we studied here, it was very much a context of shrinking civic space with limited academic freedom and limited freedom of speech for many of those who were involved. So there was quite a few operational considerations to take into account, because collaborative research needs to be there through all different stages. There needs to be a kind of sustainability in building research relationships, and it needs to be something where research partnerships are thought of as very equal. There's also very important issues around the interaction between knowledge and action. I think in the research, in the discussions earlier, we have talked about whether, how do you transform research into action? But in engaged scholarship, there is much more focus on how knowledge and action is interlinked. What we also found very interesting in the work we did on engaged scholarship here with very different country contexts was how very different country traditions play into the way that engaged scholarship can take place. And we also think about engaged scholarship as very important in terms of understanding different potential for change and how knowledge production can impact change, particularly when we think about knowledge production as part of the action. And I'll try to explain this a bit more. So the principles of engaged scholarship has to do with co-production of knowledge between scholars and activists at all levels of the research projects. It aims specifically at social change, and it's very important that we think of co-production at all stages of the research process, from the planning stage and into the implementation, and also in thinking about the dissemination and how we think about results of the research. So in this way, and we were inspired by this work by Juan and Raquez, who talk about the different stages of a process, from information to empowerment in terms of how we think about the research. And in the last stage, it is really about community leading research, decision-making, rather than researchers leading it on themselves in a way. So there are many types of engaged scholarship, and some of them have been discussed already in the discussions earlier. We looked particularly at what we call community-based research and participatory action research in our work. And community-based research could be defined as a systematic inquiry with the collaboration of those affected by the issue being studied for purposes of education and taking action or affecting change. In this work, research objects become subjects. We don't talk about research objects. And it's very much co-production of knowledge through iterative cycles of dialogue, action, and reflection. Participatory action research is very much related to this, which involves both research that is followed by action and action that is researched, changed, and researched within the research process by the participants. By this, I mean that researchers are not necessarily conducting the research first, but maybe conduct research on the change process, or the researcher is part of and is kind of activists in the research process themselves and documenting that process as well. So in this way, research should be applicable to and appropriated by the participating social actors, and the outputs of the research are very much designed to affect real action. So this approach aims to produce recommendations, strategies, and other action plans that are generated in conjunction with activists and social actors, and that are also integrated into their own practices. So if we think about this type of engaged scholarship, it's very much a dynamic educative process where all parties in the process are learning. It's action research, it's action oriented. It allows for collective construction, for collective interpretation, analysis, and reflection is inherent in the process of learning. So I think it's very important in all the work that we have looked at that everyone is focusing very much on the research process itself rather than the outcomes alone, and that the process is also an outcome. And I think also in the discussions we have had so far, this has also been important. So some of the methodologies that we found quite common in engaged scholarship were, for example, asset mapping, where you document tangible and intangible resources of a community, conscientization, which refers to process of becoming aware of political and social conditions that produce theirs or ours marginalization, interpretive focus groups, where focus group discussions are both facilitated and analyzed by community or groups under investigation themselves. It can be participant action workshops, where participants to the research analyze the root causes of their situation or problems or challenges that they're facing, and then they develop action plans for addressing these issues. These workshops could also, of course, be very much run in conjunction with any of the other activities. And there's also some of the research that we looked at that work with policy as process, where you work closely with groups and social actors to identify patterns of activity in governing, how policies are sustained or modified, and try to affect based on these kinds of understanding. I realize I might talk very fast. Aita, please shout out if I need to slow down.
It's okay, Catherine. No,
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So there are some, I think, key challenges and opportunities of engaged scholarship, and this also comes very much out of the way we always have a lot of different types of pressures and demands in academic research. There are some, of course, some key opportunities. The issue of co-production, where everyone is learning from a process, I think is very, very important and a starting point for most engaged scholarship. Change and mobilization is at the core of how we think about engaged scholarship. Also, I think it is possible to think of this process of co-production as much stronger theory building, because the theory building takes place through action and reflection. And there is a much kind of closer connection between academia and the communities that we work with in this, instead of the separation that often can take place in standard research. However, there are also a number of challenges. Ethical challenges are so many, and I'm not going to talk about all of them here. Maybe we can come back to some of them in the discussion. But I think that the ethics in terms of the relationships between researchers and research participants become quite blurred. And this might sometimes cause challenges for how we think about our role as researchers, how the communities think about the researcher, and how the communities think about their own work in relation to the research work. There's also quite a few challenges that has to do with sustainability and time. Particularly in terms of funded project, actually, we talked about funded and non-funded projects earlier. When you have a funded project that has very often a very short time span, researchers might pop in and out of a context. Even if you are a researcher in Lebanon and you work in Lebanon, you still might not have the funding to work with the community over a long period of time. And this is causing, I think, quite a few challenges in terms of how you can think of engaged scholarship and change. In this, there are also, I think, a number of issues around scaling commitments. What kind of responsibilities do the researchers have in starting a process of engaged scholarship, in terms of how long we are being involved? What kind of responsibilities do we have to actually take responsibility for changes to happen? What kind of hopes do we raise by starting a process, etc.? There is a lot of issues around this that we need to be aware of. And there's also, and we found this a lot in our interviews as well, tensions between academic career trajectories and engaged scholarship, because sometimes engaged scholarship doesn't produce the academic papers that might be required, or it takes much longer to come to the point at which you can produce or the outcomes that are necessary for an academic career. So and institutions might not be so happy for the academic taking so much time in engaging with communities, for example, being away from the institutions. There are many different types of challenges that come with being part of engaged scholarship and academia at the same time. So just to say a little bit about the projects that we were studying and why this came up. So the IDRC had been running several youth civic engagement programs in different parts of the world. They were very much inspired by the pro-democratic protests in the Middle East from 2011, or a little bit earlier perhaps. The number of regime change that had taken place across the world, including in Zimbabwe at the time, peace agreements in Colombia and other countries. So the programs wanted to look at an understanding of youth that was contextual and intersectional rather than kind of age category, to look at youth as a practice, the optimism that was very often involved at this stage of change, and to understand better the barriers and opportunities for youth to participate in civic action. So they invited a number of research projects to work with the young people as activists, and to take a sort of participatory approach in their work. So that was the starting point for some of the research programs. So from there, we interviewed some of the researchers who were running some of these engaged scholarship projects to think about what does it mean for them, what were their experiences, and what did they feel came out of it. They were very much keen on continuing this work. They felt that it had been a great privilege for them to work with funding that was actively promoting engaged scholarship. And they felt that it would have been important for them to focus more on comparing between different regions and countries to understand how different research traditions and country context were developing engaged scholarship in different ways, and what we can learn from different countries and contexts across the world. They felt that it was very important to have a funder that were very open to community engagement and co-construction at all levels. And they felt that it was important to discuss further these understandings of the relationship between knowledge and action. Some of the researchers were questioning this connection between action and knowledge production happening at the same time, and felt that it was too difficult, and they wanted to go back to more traditional methods and do the knowledge production first and then action, whilst others were very interested in continuing learning from the action as part of the knowledge production. All of the researchers that we interviewed said that they did not have enough time to actually fully fulfill the principles of engaged scholarship. It takes a lot of time to actually create the relationships that are necessary to conduct engaged scholarship. The complexity of the projects are huge. You need a lot of different skills and staff to be able to produce any outcomes from such research. And you need a lot of flexibility to work in engaged scholarship. And you need to spend a lot of time with people, which sometimes institutions were not so willing to accept. So this was one of the things that the researchers were very concerned about. Researchers also talked a lot about this responsibility to partners and research participants before and after projects, the fact that projects finished and they did not have as much time to continue to work with the research participants after the project had finished, and this was a huge frustration for many of the researchers we interviewed. The researchers was also very keen on the learning process in their academic work and how they needed to, in a way, learn from the activists and learn from each other, but how sometimes it was difficult to translate this kind of learning into academic work. And as I said, some researchers really longed for more traditional research methods to go along with the engaged scholarship, because they felt that there was a lot of things that the action research elements couldn't cover for them. We also discussed what they meant by social impact, and all of them found it a very challenging term. And even though they definitely saw that they were creating change with their research, they found it very hard to kind of pinpoint the exact type of impact that they are creating with this kind of research. But what they focused a lot on was the impact that the research had with the young people at the center of the discussion, the learning process for the young people who were involved, the process of young people understanding their role and their potential to engage in the society, for example, how in some of the projects they had worked with the young people to prepare them to interact with policymakers, and how they had sort of also made spaces where young people could encounter decision makers and create a space for these encounters, and that this had helped young people to understand what kind of change they can make. In all the projects, there was also different types of sort of videos and social media outputs that had been very important for creating a kind of legacy of the projects, and that the activists could continue to use after the project had finished. But all the researchers also focused on how much resources are needed for these kinds of outputs, and how it is difficult to get that funded within the research projects. So moving to some of the reflections from the youth activists and the participants in the research projects. They were all viewing the being involved as research participants in these types of research projects as beneficial, but that there sometimes were implementation problems in terms of being informed about what was going on, traveling to where they needed to be, to also find the time to be involved. And many of them focused a lot, which is very comparable with what the researchers said, on how the research and being involved in this kind of research had made them more aware of the structural constraints that they were part of, but that they also felt that they could have learned much more from other activists, and that research projects could have maybe linked across countries or helped to make networks with youth activists in other contexts who shared same interests, for example. They were very, the youth activists and also research participants felt that they felt very valued for being part of a research project, and that their views were very much listened to, that they could also learn from the research, you know, what is research and how can we do research. But again, they also felt that there is more that could be done in terms of identifying gaps in their own knowledge and practice in order to help them to define what to do next. So they felt that they learned a lot, and that the kind of capacity building component of being part of action research was very important. And this was something that came back and back. The learning process of being involved was perhaps one of the most important aspects of being involved. On the other hand, the outputs of the projects, like the dissemination, the even the academic articles that was produced, etc., they did not find very important and useful. They focused much more on the process, the dialogues, the conversations, etc., and not the tangible outputs that was for them most important. As I said earlier, and as the researchers also focused on, they felt that the research projects were often quite understaffed, and that they would have appreciated to work with maybe a bigger team, with more people with different skills, so they could also learn more from the process. So in this way, they really, I think, appreciated the role of the researcher as a facilitator for them to learn, to exchange ideas, to be the guide in the discussions, and as a sort of mediator to other and bigger networks. They also, I think the youth activists also felt that even though they were involved in defining and deciding on some of the research themes, they felt that maybe some of the scopes of the research was too wide, and they would prefer to focus much more on some of the key issues that they felt could sometimes be a bit watered out. And also that they felt that the researchers' insights and conclusions were sort of coming at the end of the project, whereas they would have preferred to learn more from the researchers all the way. So in this way, I think they didn't feel that they were enough involved in validating findings along the way of the research projects. And I think this is a very interesting finding in terms of thinking of how we work with our research participants. And also they felt that it could be interesting to have impact evaluation going along with the project, so they could also learn. So there was much more of a kind of learning loop throughout the project. So in this sense, they also felt that there could be more space for the activists and the research participants to influence the ideas of the research project from the beginning. And this is, of course, one of the key issues in a lot of participatory and engaged scholarship. So perhaps, and this was some of the research participants were focusing on this, was that they would have appreciated some sort of stakeholder mapping in the beginning of the project to be able to understand what the relationships and potential collaborations that could come out of the research would have been. So this is just a few snippets of what we did in this research, and a few ideas of what research participants and researchers who are working in this field think about research. I think it's very important that we think about our research as impact through engaged scholarship as a way of thinking about the research conduct itself as a potential for creating impact, and not only something that comes after as a translation into impact. And I think that what's interesting from working with the research participants of research is how limited value they put on the outputs of research that we often as researchers think of as the kind of key thing. We have to publish, we have to get the report out, we have to get the policy brief out. But it is the process and the involvement of people and the learning that comes out of that research participants very often focus more on. So in this time, I think that also when we think about collaborative research, it might help us to break with the activist practices that have not been examined reflexively, so we can think of social movement theories that are kind of remaining untested, and we can nuance them more in terms of thinking about what is actually social mobilization or civic engagement when we as researchers involve in it ourselves. I think engaged scholarship, therefore, could allow for a more innovation in terms of the concept and tools that we use in our research. And perhaps it's through those concepts and tools that we can also allow for a greater possibility for change. So in this context, I think the timing becomes extremely important. When we work from one funded project to another, it's very hard to think of change, because we need to build relationships over time. We need to maybe be able to do multiple project cycles with the same group of people to be able to create change, because it takes time to create that change. And I will stop there, I think, for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Catherine. It's a very interesting research, which as well highlighted the things as researchers, what we experienced, and to be part of, the participants taking part in, identifying what's the limitations, what's the impact of our work, and so forth. So now we will leave it to discussions. So if any of the participants have any inquiries, suggestions, ideas you want to share, so feel free to do so.
Getting towards the end of the
yes,
week.
And it's Friday, people are tired.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much for this presentation. I will introduce myself again. My name is LEBANON, and I'm working under LEBCA, Lebanon Civic Action Accelerator Program. And one of our priorities under this program is gender equality and social inclusion, with a main component that targets disability and the disability movement in Lebanon. And I mentioned earlier that we are prioritizing a consultative research now in order for us to be informed on the priorities, whether for advocacy purposes or for capacity strengthening for the disability movement in Lebanon. And one of our objectives as part of this research is youth engagement. So especially that we have noticed in our refinement phase earlier that youth or young people with disabilities are sort of overshadowed or quite invisible in the public sphere, especially when it comes to advocacy in Lebanon. And we are trying to see how we can involve these community members. So what I wanted to address, or what I want to raise here when it comes to the approaches that you have adopted in these research studies that you conducted, especially when it comes to the research development or the methodology and so on and so forth, and how you try to engage community members for activists, young activists, and youth in general. So their involvement was following the design of the research, or even during the design of the research, you were consulting with them and trying to engage them so you know what to prioritize during the research phase or the implementation phase. And second, I know that there were a lot of opportunities that you mentioned earlier relating to democratic procedures, the protests, and so on and so forth. But it's also important for us to mention that in the Lebanese context, it's quite hard for us to continuously or smoothly conduct outreach activities to community members, regardless of what community we are working with. And we know that it's been a while now that a lot of institutions have been paralyzed, especially public institutions, and most of the services or the causes that we work on are institutionalized within the civil society. And in addition to that, youth are not quite engaged even within the civil society. So this creates a major challenge or an obstacle for us to reach these individuals. So any insights on that, on both my questions? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry. And of course, I was covering 3 very different contexts, so I didn't go into each of the projects or anything like that. And I think in all the 3 projects that we were studying in depth, you know, Colombia, Zimbabwe, and the Middle East, which was different, several different countries, there were quite a lot of restrictions to how you could facilitate, I would say, engagement with young people. And that's where I think it's very important to think about the local conditions for participation. But I think in all the 3 situations, so the research participants that we were talking to, you know, they were all very appreciative of the having a space to develop their understanding as the first stage. So it was a bit like some research is looking at how you start internally, right? You start internally and you think how you can create a common understanding in the group before you start thinking about how you can take that to a policymaker. So I think there's also different steps, even in a country like Lebanon, where you start to kind of it's the conscientization process in a way, and then together you can find ways of also maybe making encounters possible. But we also know that there are challenges to how you can create change, you know, policy change, etc., in a country like Lebanon. So there's also, maybe there are other spaces that we have to think of and identify in that particular context that are more important to focus on when it comes to change. So I think that context analysis and the way that many of the research participants emphasized the need for being more involved in a stakeholder mapping to understand the different, you know, their role in that sort of bigger picture of different actors is also very important. So there's a lot, I think, to do in terms of how we can work with the research participants in that way. It's also very interesting what you say about, you know, young people not being so involved in civil society, for example. And several of the researchers were actually talking about how challenging it was that a lot of the young people that they worked with, they wanted change, but they didn't know what kind of change they wanted. So it's also about how do we think about working with youth and thinking about what is it that we can do, what kind of work can we do together to actually formulate, you know, visions for the future, for example. And here I thought it was very interesting to interview the staff in the funding organization, because they had this huge sort of ideas about the importance of youth being the future and the youth being the symbol of change, etc. But when in fact you talk about talk with the researchers working on youth, you find that it's not so easy to you know, connect youth and change like immediately, because there are many other interests, and also that sometimes the ideas are not necessarily so well formed. So I thought there was a lot of interesting aspect actually that came out in terms of understanding what youth means in this context, and how that, you know, what is the consequence for how we then work with young people in that context. So yeah, I don't know if that actually responds to your question. There are difficult questions, but I think the issue of contextualization was very important, because in each of the contexts we worked with, they found that, you know, they were engaging with young people in different ways because of the necessity of the context. In Zimbabwe, for example, they needed to make sure people met in safe spaces. You couldn't, you know, you had to vet people because there is a lot of intelligence, etc. So you had to always contextualize the work that you were doing very, very carefully.
Thank you, Katrina.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up if it wasn't really responding to everything, but
Any other questions, suggestions? Katrina, maybe I will ask about the ethics because you've mentioned the ethics, and I think sometimes, especially when involving the youth with the IRB and all of that, sometimes like you have a time frame to do your research, and then you want to obtain the ethical approval, and one of the restrictions is the age group. And the younger the participants are, the more difficult it is to obtain the IRB. So can you tell us more about the ethics in that sense?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. So I think there are two separate issues here. So one is the age group, and one is the nature of doing engaged scholarship in itself. So to take the last first, the nature of working in engaged scholarship. I mean, part of the issue working with engaged scholarship is that you cannot know where you're going with the process, because part of the idea is to work with your research participants. So you cannot predict every step of the process, because the principle would be that research participants should also be part of deciding those steps. This makes it extremely difficult for many IRB processes to engage with this kind of work, because we cannot always know. So there's a lot of negotiation often at that level, I think, and it really shows how skewed the IRB process is toward more kind of positivist type of research. And we need to be aware of this. And there is, of course, there's an ongoing discussion about this, but IRB processes have not changed because of that. So I think it is very important that we have to find ways of negotiating that in the way that we describe the research, and we can document the research. It doesn't respond to, it's not a solution, but I think it is something that you have to be very aware of how you would kind of sell that project into an IRB board. When it comes to working with people below the age of 18 sometimes, or 16 in other contexts, yes, that is of course also very problematic, because you would need informed consent from parents, and it's a long and very laborious process to be involved. And again, it is, of course, it is frustrating if you have funding and you spend the first 1.5 years trying to get IRB approval, because then all of it is gone. But again, it is possible to get beyond that. But again, it is about the funding of the funder and the time you have to actually get this through the system. So I think there's much more. There's a need for more focus on how time-consuming these processes are, and how problematic IRB will be in these kinds of projects. I mean, Birseit has been doing quite interesting work on this ethics portal and thinking about contextual ethics, etc. And I think we need to push for this much more in our context. So I would just say that this is a work where we need to unite across different contexts, different disciplines who are interested in doing engaged scholarship, both with youth and more generally engaged scholarship, to push for ethic procedures that actually can allow for this type of scholarship to be included. So that's my response, because currently it is quite hard, I would say. So
yeah. Thank you, Katrina. Any other comments? I think, Katrina, do you have any other ideas that you want to share? Because I think we can be, or if you want, we want to conclude the session, like any kind of recommendations or.
Yeah, well, I think I really enjoyed listening to the different presentations and discussions today, and I think we have, in a way, discussed two different ways of thinking about impact. So one is where you you do your research and then you translate that into something that you want to use for advocating for change, or whether you think about impact as something that's more integral to your research practices, right? And maybe both of those are important. I thought it was so interesting that some of the researchers we interviewed who were doing activist research in a way, they longed for doing a bit more of these traditional research methods. They wanted to be able to sit down and say, you know, look at a number of interviews, or think about data in a different way. And maybe there is a space for both of those ways of thinking about impact that we need to maintain, but also that in any case, impact takes time, and it's very hard to see impact something that happens just after a year, for example. And that's why we need to build communities, and we need to work together and continue to be in this work together. And you can't just sort of jump in and out of a research project, but as a researcher, you're abiding by that theme and that work, and you're part of that world in a way. So I think maybe that's what I get out of the discussions today in many ways.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you so much, Katrina. And as you said, as you concluded, it's both ways. So from the researcher's perspective, from the participants, and we can all make an impact, and impact can as well take time sometimes. So even if you don't notice that you make an impact now, in a few months or few years, you will notice that based on the projects you're working on. So this we will be concluding this for today. We will be sending the recorded sessions for you, and we look for more interaction. So you have any questions for us, you can send us by email for guidelines for anything related to disability or any of the topics that we have discussed for today. Thank you so much. Have a nice weekend. Huda. Yes, Huda.
هلو. بصراحة قبل البريك كان عندي سؤال.
Yes.
ممكن. So my question is to Dr. عتاب. ما مذكرة بالضبط آلاء شو كانت عم تحكي، بس حكيتوا شيء عن التيرمز، الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. ممكن شوي ترجعي توضحي عن هالنقطة، لأنه
عن التعريف إنه شو معنى الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة؟
الاستخدام، إنه بفترة صار الاستخدام استغنوا عن الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، وصار بكثير من قراءاتي عم بمرق على التيرمز على التيرم children بدل children disability. فبس إذا في بعدين جد المصطلح أصحاب الهمم أو ذوي الهمم. هلا أنت حكيتي عن نقطة إنه الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة يعني الشخص قبل الإعاقة، وهذا الشيء كمان بينطبق على الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة. بس إذا بتقدري تفرقي لي بين التو.
أكيد. الاحتياجات الخاصة هون بتشمل أكثر من الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. يعني ممكن أنا بفترة ما أكسر إجري أحتاج شيء، ففي عندي احتياجات خاصة. شخص تاني ممكن محتاج ترجمة لغة، ترجمة عادية، هذا كمان عنده احتياجات خاصة لأنه ما بيتكلم اللغة. فكلمة احتياجات خاصة كتير واسعة. فعشان هيك صار خصوصا وقت نحكي عن الحقوق من ناحية القانون الدولي لحماية الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، في عنا ضمن القانون في مستلزمات لازم تنطبق، مثل البطاقة إلى ما هنالك من حقوق. فلما يجي الشخص نحط الاحتياجات الخاصة مش دايما يمكن يكون عنده إعاقة، فعشان هيك كلمة الاحتياجات الخاصة أوسع، وبالتالي وجب تحديدها على أساس الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة يستفيدوا من الخدمات المخصصة لهم. فمن هالمجال اتفقوا على كلمة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة لتحديد مين هن المستهدفين لياخذوا حقهم.
اوكي، يعني هي
يعني
مزيد
الأشخاص ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة مفهوم أوسع، it's more inclusive، بتتضمن يمكن الحامل، بتتضمن الأهل والصار اللي عندهم عائلة، بتتضمن كتير أشخاص أوسع. فعشان هيك وجب تحديدها بقصة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة مثل ما قلت لك ليستخدموها بحقوقهم.
نعم. هو بس أنا كان سؤالي لسبب لأنه بارتكلز من اللي كنت أقراهن لما يمرق مثلا children with special needs كانوا بيقصدوا ذوي الإعاقة، لأنه كان مثلا يكون عن deaf children أو
مزبوط.
أي نوع
هي حتى ما هي دايما عم بيصير في تطوير للترمينولوجيز، فبفترة ما كان مقبول كلمة special needs واللي هي الاحتياجات الإضافية حتى أو الاحتياجات الخاصة، ولكن صار في جدلية قانونيا انه تعريف مين هن قد، فعشان ملء الثغرات هاي صار في تحديد إلها، صارت كلمة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. يعني بعد ما طلع CRPD صار في تحديد للمصطلح هيدا واعتماده. هلا يمكن بعد فترة تطلع كلمة جديدة، يعني نتوقع انه مع المفاهيم اللي عم تتغير باتجاه الإعاقة وباتجاه الانكلوجن والدمج يمكن يطلع مفهوم جديد بعد كم سنة ما بنعرف، بس حاليا طالما كله اجمع عم تستخدم الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. هلا ببريطانيا يمكن بيستخدموا كلمة disabled وبعدين people، فهون بتجي معناتها بس هون طالما نحن حاطين البيبل، حاطين الشخص وصارت الإعاقة مش هي يعني مش هي الكلمة السلبية، فهون it's acceptable لأنه معترفة إنه الإعاقة هي مشكلة بالمجتمع وليس بالشخص.
نعم. اوكي، هو بس لانه بفتره قبل ما بلش انتبه لمصطلح ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصه كان المصطلح الموجود هو with disabilities اللي هلا نرجع له، لما بعدين صار المصطلح ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصه اوسع وبيشمل الاشخاص اكثر من النطاق هيدا. بس اللي بقصده انا هون انه لما نستغنوا او لما نستبدلوا مصطلح ذوي الاعاقه بذوي الاحتياجات الخاصه كان القصد انه هيداك مصطلح سلبي، عشان هيك صار يقولوا ما تقولوا كذا قولوا كذا. فهمتي قصدي؟ وهلا رجعنا له، فهي بس انه نحن ما نربط كلمه
هو رجعنا لا، لانه هون ترجع الاساس بكلمه الاعاقه نفسها disability. هل هي disability هي المجتمع عملها او هل هي شيء بالانسان؟ فهون هي الفلسفه تبعها، يعني طالما انه هي لا الاعاقه يعني اوكي انا ممكن يكون ما بقدر اشوف، بس انا اذا اعطاني شخص العصاية البيضاء أو عطاني بريل أو أي شيء أنا بقدر أوصل لكل شيء بقدر عليه. فهون إنه الشيء اللي صار عندي ما وقفني عن اندمج بالمجتمع طالما أزيلت من حوالي العوائق. فهون صارت كلمة الديسابيليتي بشكل إيجابي ما كانت بشكل سلبي أو مزعج، لأنه تشخصت بالمحيط تبع الشخص. وبالتالي طالما اجى المبدأ من هون انه فهم الإعاقة هي ليست شيء سيء يوصف الشخص، بل هي المحيط اللي حواليه اللي هو معوقه، وبالتالي صار الكلمة مقبولة.
اوكي شكرا.
اوكي، هل في استفسارات تانية؟ تمام، شكرا كثير لكم، واكيد مثل ما خبرت نحن بنرجع بنبعث بالايميل تفاصيل عن اللينك تبع حلقه التسجيل اليوم، واتمنى لكم ويكند سعيد. شكرا.
Thank you.